Good morning and welcome to the College of Wooster's Martin Luther King Day celebration. I want to start by offering my tremendous thanks to Shaquez Dickens and everyone on the Martin Luther King Day Committee for creating today's celebration by which we honor the legacy, the vision, the courage, and the work of Dr. Martin Luther King as he fought racism and worked to create a more just, democratic society. Dr. King's extraordinary efforts changed this country profoundly. Dr. King was killed 54 years ago, but our reflections on his life are not only about history. The struggle to create an inclusive, egalitarian democracy that's free of racism and discrimination is current and it's urgent. And it's going to take all of us to move it forward here on Wooster's campus, as well as around our country and around the world. So today we have the opportunity to reflect on our own lives and to reflect on the actions that we can take, that we each must take to extinguish racism and to create justice. While the Martin Luther King Day of Service is an annual celebration, Martin Luther King Day 2022 finds us in a unique time. In the 2 years since our last in-person Martin Luther King Day gathering, we have been immersed in dual, interwoven pandemics of COVID-19 and of lethal racist violence. These pandemics demonstrate so clearly and so terribly painfully how far we have yet to go to become a truly just nation, a nation that is free of the deadly harms of racism, a nation where people can finally hold equal rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, those rights that are named in the Declaration of Independence, but that are yet to be realized for so many people. The COVID pandemic has amplified and laid bare profound inequities in access to necessities like healthcare and employment. Racism, redlining, and discrimination, injustices against which Martin Luther King mobilized a nation, mean that low-income communities and communities of color bear a tremendously unequal burden in illness and death due to COVID, with Black and Latinx Americans far more likely to have access only to overstretched hospitals and almost 3 times as likely to die from COVID-19 as white Americans. Black and Latinx Americans are also twice as likely to face serious financial problems such as food and housing insecurity as a result of the pandemic. And of course, the pandemic health crisis coincides with other persistent and relentless threats to communities of color, including disparate impacts of accelerating climate change and persistent lethal violence against Black people and others from marginalized communities. We are living in difficult times, as Dr. King did as well. And many of Dr. King's books and speeches read as if they could have been written today as we face these persistent life and death issues of structural inequality, white supremacy, and racist violence. Throughout his life, Dr. King made clear the challenges that we face, and he asked each of us to ask ourselves, what actions can we each take that would make a difference? Dr. King wrote of the power of nonviolent protest as well as the role of civil rights law. And he insisted on the absolute necessity of the transformation of individual perspective among those who hold privilege. Dr. King reminds us that progress requires both urgent action and deep reflection, both a commitment to work relentlessly for justice and a commitment to honestly examine one's own ideas and biases and to change them. With those tools and with extraordinary courage, Dr. King moved mountains, and he shows us a way forward as well. In his speech at the 1963 March on Washington, Dr. King said this: "We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of our democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It's that action that we engage in together today with the help of our wonderful speakers and leaders. And we must continue to commit to it in the days and years ahead so that we can create a fully just community here on Wooster's campus, as well as across our society in the United States and around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bolton, for that wonderful welcome. Good morning and welcome to the College of Wooster's annual Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. My name is Cliff Bobbitt, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Student Affairs and Senior Associate Dean of Students, and I use he, him, and his pronouns. For the last several months, the MLK Day Committee has met to establish today's program. I would like to thank the committee for their hard work and dedication in making today happen. I'd also like to thank each of you for joining us today. The theme for today's celebration is Our Legacy Matters. If not us, then who? I want each of you to ponder the following thought. Where would we be without Nelson Mandela, Rosa Parks, Ruby Bridges, Martin Luther King Jr., and the countless others who paved the way for us? If not them, then who? I hope today leaves you energized, inspired, and motivated. You matter. Your legacy matters. If not you, then who? We have a wonderful event planned for today. We have a video project to share created by one of our very own students, a chorale performance by the Wooster Chorus, 4 wonderful speakers, a student, a staff member, and a faculty member, and an alumni of the college. And we conclude our day with justice dialogues. With no further ado, I would like to introduce the video project developed by our very own MLK Mangoshi. We all know about MLK's dream. MLK's video highlights the dreams of the college community. MLK is a song by the Irish rock band U2 and is the 10th and final track of their 1984 album, The Unforgettable Fire. The song is an elegy to Martin Luther King Jr. Performing MLK, the Wooster Chorus.
Sleep tonight, and may your dreams be realized. If the thundercloud passes rain, so let it rain down on him. So let it be. So let it Sleep tonight, and may your dreams be realized. If the thundercloud passes so Sleep tonight, and may your dreams be realized. If the thundercloud passes rain, so let it rain down on him. So let it be. So let it be. Sleep tonight, and may your dreams be realized. If the thundercloud passes so let it
Thank you, Wooster Chorus, for that amazing selection. Our first speaker is our very own Sarem Cher Kornma. Cher is a 22-year-old senior at the College of Wooster who is majoring in political science with a focus on international relations. She is currently an intern for the Center for Diversity and Inclusion and is on the board of the Black Students Association. Cher is working toward completing the independent study on the use of political rhetoric on foreign policy. A 2018 graduate of Paint Branch High School, Cher hopes to pursue a career in grassroots politics and education. As an immigrant and a first-generation student, Cher believes in the importance of strong advocacy and equality. Cher Korma.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sadem Kornama. I am a first-generation Ethiopian American college student, and it is an honor to be representing the students here at the College of Wooster during an amazing day like this one. Today, we are celebrating the legacy of Martin Luther King and his dedication to equality and a better future. Throughout today, you will find that there are many different ways in which all of us think about those two things, equality and a better future. You will notice the many areas of conversations where these concepts appear. And as you attend different justice dialogues, it is important for you to also define what those ideas mean to you. When I was 7 years old, I immigrated to the United States with my family in search of better opportunities and a better future. In my quest, like many of you, it quickly became clear to me that pursuing higher education was an important part of that. What I was not yet aware of at that young age, however, was the decades of blood, sweat, and tears that preceded me so that these very opportunities could be accessible to me. While I grew up learning about the racist and sexist history of this country, it wasn't until I enrolled in my Black Women in the Black Freedom Movement class my freshman year here that I truly learned about the sacrifice, time, and dedication it takes to enact and effect change. My education here has taught me that too often, the hardest and most important historical work has been done by people who do not receive the credit and recognition for it. This particular lesson has helped me define what I believe equality and a better future looks like. Equality to me looks like uplifting the voices of the unheard and advocating for justice for those who experience injustice. A better future to me would be one where that work no longer needs to happen. While this is the ideal we should all strive for, it is clear that there is still so much work that needs to be done. This is why the legacy that you leave behind, both here and where you end up, is important. How you use the tools you have around you to pursue the change that you want to see in the world will determine the future. Because if not you, then who? And if not us as a community, then who? This year, we are asked to think about our legacy and the impact all of us can have in our time here, not just as college students and employees, but as individual people. How we dedicate our time and the things we are committed to ultimately determines the impact we have in our own future. Over the last 3 years here, I have experienced tremendous growth and change. My time here has shaped who I am and helped me discover what I am passionate about. As a political science major, I knew early on that the focus of my passion would surround political advocacy for underrepresented groups. Witnessing the changes that have been made here by my peers has only made that passion grow stronger. The legacy of the students on this campus, both past and present, continues to inspire me. The history of students on this campus pushing for the changes we experience today is one we rarely hear about. So in the spirit of honoring our legacy as a campus community, I would like to recognize and commend the students before me who participated in critical demonstrations that shaped our school into looking better than they had found it. The students who participated in the Gulpen sit-in in 1989 that changed the way the school deals with and responds to racial incidents serve as an exceptional example of the importance of mobilizing in the face of injustice. Between the organized Black Lives Matter protests last academic year and conversations and changes surrounding the manifesto this year, it is clear that the spirit of activism is still alive within our community, and it is important for us to recognize and celebrate that. In 2000, the College of Wooster created a documentary surrounding the events of the Gulpen sit-in in 1989. And in it, an alumni student recounts the events and offers a quote that truly stuck with me. In the documentary, former student Antoine Chambers says, "You have to go beyond traditional means to make a difference. What you are experiencing now is not the end nor the beginning." In this quote, Chambers encapsulates a key message which suggests that it is important to right the wrongs you see around you and move forward, having left the places you've been better than you found it. These triumphs, no matter how small, can potentially open up opportunities and make changes that are more accessible to those that follow us, just as those before us have put in the work to do for us. Within the past few years, the unique challenge of COVID has proved that we as a campus are capable of considering one another during times of need. Our individual efforts of maintaining safety protocols ultimately determine the overall health of our school and those around us. These critical times revealed to all of us that one of the most important things in our lives are the people we love and the time that we get to share together. I'm proud to say that part of my legacy on this campus these past 3 years has been showing up. I show up for my friends and family, and I show up to student-led efforts for change. Something as simple as showing up can go a long way. The community and friendships that I have built here have supported me through crazy times and given me the strength to carry on. For that, I want to say thank you to my friends Alma Cruz, Pragya Mittal, Ellie Perez, and Laura Peterjohn. You four women have been critical to my success here, and I could not have come this far without you. The bond that we have been able to build here will last us a lifetime, and I'm glad that Wooster has helped us foster the space to grow together. This year, I have the privilege of being on the board of BSA and working with my peers to create a community space for Black students of all backgrounds. Sharing that space with other Black students has allowed me to be understood and heard in ways that are unique to my lived experiences. In addition to this, however, BSA is also a space for laughter, creativity, and most of all, hope. Coming to a predominantly white institution in a small town in Ohio is a difficult transition. And thanks to Black orgs on campus, it isn't a transition any of us have to do alone. A handful of Black freshmen on campus can attest to how passionate I can be about reminding them to come to BSA meetings. To them, it might seem like I'm nagging and taking my small board position too seriously, but the truth is I do it because I know how much of a difference being in a space like that can make. Feeling accepted and understood is an integral part of a healthy mental state and can help students' overall academic performances. And my only regret as a senior is not having joined BSA sooner. Over my last few months here, I've also been an intern for the college's Center for Diversity and Inclusion. This position has given me the opportunity to see firsthand the amount of work that goes into organizing a day like this for all of us. The months of planning, preparation are dedicated to representing the ranging identities on this campus. In recognition of that hard work, I am very grateful to be part of this opening ceremony. To be listed among such accomplished Black women is an incredible honor, and I only hope to be as accomplished in my future. I look forward to hearing what they have to say. To end my speech for MLK Day, I want to remark one of my favorite MLK quotes. Change does not roll on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. With this quote, I implore you to take a chance on the skills that you have and the voice that you have to make an effective change, because if not us, then who?
Cher, thanks for your inspiring words. Cher is graduating and leaving us soon for great things. I encourage you all to connect with Cher before she leaves us. Our next speaker is a staff member here at the College of Wooster, Dr. Latoya Renee Robertson, an author, implicit bias researcher, speaker, businesswoman, and educator. Joined Wooster staff as Associate Dean of Students and Director of Divisional DEI Initiatives this fall. Robertson has overcome many struggles as a first-generation low-income student to become a TED Talk presenter, an accredited television music composer, consultant, educator, 3-time author, world traveler, and implicit bias expert. Dr. Latoya Renee Robertson.
I was born by the river in a little tent. And oh, just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. A change is gonna come was sung by the artist Sam Cooke and was released in 1964 during the Civil Rights Movement. The opening 2 stanzas talked about humble beginnings, a never-ending hustle and bustle, and the hope of something different, something better. For many years, those 2 stanzas represented my life and how I felt. While I wasn't born in a tent or by a river, my beginnings were humble. And since I could remember, I was on the grind for something better. Then 2020 happened. Many of the things that happened in 2020 were also happening back in 1964. Now, in that summer, the summer of 2020, I lived in Fayetteville, North Carolina, the birthplace of George Floyd. As you can imagine, protests were happening. I knew from all the protests taking place that people get hurt where protests are. And I can't reach for something better or make a difference if I'm hurt. So I stayed at the house. To a certain extent, I felt ashamed. Civil rights leaders marched. They faced harm and danger regularly. I questioned, how can I make a legacy in my house? And I quickly responded, how can I make a legacy if I'm dead? I rationalized finding other ways to make a difference. I found safety at home. Then Breonna Taylor happened. Breonna was home safely with her doors locked, probably in some comfy socks and some night gear. She was murdered at home. For the first time in my life, I did not feel safe inside of my house. For weeks, I could not sleep. Now, see, before, the common assumption was you had to be outside. You had to be where the action was to face any kind of danger. But Breonna was literally sleeping. For a brief moment, my hope was gone, and I did not believe that change was going to come. Now, in my head, there's no way that you can make a difference or get ahead if you can't even sleep safely. So I started to look at majority Black countries like Ghana or Zambia to migrate to. I felt like that was the only way it could make sense. But as I researched more and more, it kept hitting me. To do this, I would have to move away across the world from everything that I love. I felt lied to by Sam Cooke. Just as I was stewing in my feelings, I received a call. It was a student I used to work with. They said they had just gotten their first big job. The biggest surprise was they said it was because of me. Now, I was confused. What exactly had I done? Other than show up? Other than solve problems that they had? Pursue excellence? I was puzzled. And then the flood happened. It was a flood of communication from students, texts, calls, emails, and they all essentially said the same thing. I made a difference in their life. And of course I asked why and how. Their response, you believed in me and you showed up. You showed up even when it was hard. These efforts were my protests. See, these students were students that had no one else that believed in them. Sometimes their culture didn't reflect the majority. They were the others. They were underrepresented. And sometimes they didn't look like me. A lot of times they did. Now, when I asked how I helped them, how I made a difference in their life, I thought that they would cite things that I considered major points in my career, like the creation of courses, first-year programs. But they said things like, I made sure that they ate. I came to their events. I stood in protest for their culture. And that's when it hit me. I am constantly creating a legacy. These students are my legacy. This is my protest. Every policy that I changed or helped to create, every student that I went to bat for, every dollar that I spent, that was my protest. That's my legacy. Before, I thought I had to solve world hunger. I didn't feel like I was doing enough, but I was, and I am. Those students let me know change is happening. The fact that I'm trying to solve hunger issues fed hundreds of students. I am the change Sam Cooke spoke about. We all are. Sometimes we get caught in the mundane and we feel small and helpless because the things around us seem so big. But in all actuality, we're changing lives simply by showing up. We're changing lives by making an effort to learn and grow, to balance the playing field that has been off balance for centuries. Now, for some, showing up has in fact been the bare minimum. That can no longer happen. Your legacy requires it. Your statement for diversity can no longer be performative. That must change. If you see something, you must say something, do something. While each of us has moments of hopelessness that we're running like a river, we've been running since we could remember. We are the change that has come. If we want to be, we are the building blocks of our legacy and the legacies of the lives that we touch. I am not satisfied with the status quo, and I did not come here to be amongst average. I came here to create a legacy. I believe you did too. Now, as you show up in your truth, in your kindness, in your excellence and care, regardless of what it is that you do, you're building legacies. We are building legacies. At the end of the day, will you be proud of yours? What will your legacy say about you? Thank you.
Thank you, Latoya, for your words of wisdom. If you have not met Latoya yet, come and introduce yourself. You can find Latoya in the Dean of Students Suite in Galpin Hall. Our next speaker is a faculty member at the College of Wooster. Dr. Beatrice J. Adams is an assistant professor of African American history at the College of Wooster. She received her doctoral degree in African American and African diaspora history from Rutgers, New Brunswick in the spring of 2021. Her research examines the experiences of African Americans who chose to stay and return to the American South during the Great Migration. And it has been supported by the John Hope Franklin Center and the Andrew Mellon Foundation. While at Rutgers, she also served as a researcher for the Rise Up Newark Digital History Project and the Scarlet and Black Project. She received her BA in History and Religion and Philosophical Studies from Fisk University in 2012. She received her MA in Social Sciences from the University of Chicago in 2013. She is a member of Phi Beta Kappa and Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She enjoys shopping for basically everything, listening to audiobooks, and visiting obscure historical sites. Dr. Beatrice J. Adams.
As a historian, people tend to assume that you're good with dates. I, however, am not. I don't remember the birthdays of my friends. I don't remember the birthdays of my family members. Honestly, I really remember my own anniversary. However, as a cultural historian, I am deeply invested in the understanding and the meaning of moments. As one historian said, creating fully loaded accountings of how finite moments change the world, specifically the way we see and make sense of it. One of these moments for me, for us, for our nation, was August 9th, 2014. That moment, as one student recently asked me, was the moment I dedicated myself to the business of doing history, or as historians like to say, making use of the past. More generally, the date is marked by the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Ferguson is about 20 miles from where I grew up in Alton, Illinois, so the killing of Brown felt quite personal. Adding to the proximity was the fact that my brother had been killed not 10 miles from Ferguson by a former police officer. At 6 feet 6 inches tall, my brother was a towering rock in my life. His death had driven me to leave Chicago, more specifically the University of Chicago, and to question my commitment to the life of the mind. So in fact, the killing of Mike Brown was personal. Still grieving for my own brother's killing, I went to Ferguson on the first night of the protests, and I saw other folks grieving. I saw people crying for and creating order in the midst of chaos, emotionally, spiritual, political chaos. I heard astute political critiques, I heard rage, and I heard love. Pulled towards this world, I made a choice about my own future. I would not continue to attend the protest, but I would return back to my home in Alton, finish packing up my stuff, and move across the country to New Jersey to pursue a PhD in African American history. However, I would use my PhD, my teaching, my research, my service, my career, my life, to bring to life the ideas, the rage, the injustices, the humanity I saw that night in Ferguson. Accepting this charge puts me in good company. It puts me among generations of teacher activists who saw their classrooms as a key site in their protests, and among a rich intellectual legacy of African American intellectuals, scholars, thinkers dedicated to the task of Black liberation. Specifically, it means stepping onto the shoulders of bell hooks, whose discussion of the classroom as a key site in the fight for liberation and teaching as an act of love deeply informed my own understanding of what it means to teach. It meant stepping onto the shoulders of Ella Baker, whose commitment to radical democracy in practice has shaped the course of American history and understandings of freedom that I seek to impart to my own students. It also meant stepping onto the shoulders of Josephine Wright, whose pedagogical legacy has continuously been shared with me since I arrived at the college. It meant stepping onto the shoulders of Pauli Murray, whose conceptualization of Jim Crow provides an invaluable lens for understanding the ways gender and sexual identity shape the day-to-day lived experiences of Black folks. It meant stepping onto the shoulders of Rosa Parks, whose activism around the issue of rape helped me to understand the interconnectedness of racial and sexual violence. It meant stepping onto the shoulders of Lydia Thompson, whose leadership in Wooster challenged the community to embrace and celebrate its African American history. And of course, it meant stepping onto the shoulders of Dr. Martin Luther King, whose legacy continues to create space for these moments of reflection, whose legacy provides a guide for unlocking and understanding the power of love. In his final book, Where Do We Go From Here?, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said the following: "What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love." Having turned his sights onto the issue of property, King was building what we might call an intersectional movement, the poor people's movement. He was fighting injustice in every realm of American life. And despite the tension between himself and what we largely see as the Black Power movement, he was calling for Black empowerment. In fact, he was in Memphis, where his final speech was given and where he was assassinated, to provide aid and support to striking sanitation workers. King as fighting for economic justice, King as an intersectional activist, King as a human rights activist is not the most common way we encounter King. He is not the king of high school history textbooks. He is not the king of the morning news. Instead, in those places, we get King as nonviolent, King as peace-loving above all, and even King as colorblind. Too often, this is the King that is invoked when critiquing the movement that the killing of Mike Brown helped to fuel. King would never, if King were alive. While such comments occasionally challenged by King's comments on the riots as the language of the unheard, these challenges fail to see how the movement was bigger than King. The struggle longer, broader, and wilder than many of our wildest dreams. Instead, we should understand the shoulders of King as challenging us to consider prison abolitionists, asking, why have we come to associate community safety and personal security with the degree to which the state exercises violence through policing and criminal justice? Instead, we should understand the shoulders of King as asking us to consider protesters in Texas and in Mississippi and across the South, the nation, and our world, demanding access to abortions. Instead, we should understand the shoulders of King as challenging us to consider our own students, demanding transparency and resources available to Black international students, protections against hate speech, and empathy and safety in the classroom. Another treasured moment for me is meeting C.T. Vivian. I would argue that C.T. Vivian might be understood as a lesser known figure in the modern Black freedom movement. However, Vivian is a well-known figure in association with the Selma Voting Rights Act. He was also a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and Vivian died in 2020 on the same day as Representative John Lewis. I met Vivian at my undergraduate alma mater, where he was discussing the legacy of King, his relationship with King, the legacy of the Civil Rights Movement, and his relationship to the legacy of the Civil Rights Movement. However, the moment I treasure was not this speech, but his embodiment of love. As a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, Vivian was also a minister. And like other members of the Nashville movement, James Lawson, James Belville, John Lewis, Diane Nash, of course, he was deeply committed to the radical potential of love. Vivian's commitment to love was more than a moral obligation, and it came through actually during his discussion of his wife, a wife I thought he still grieved. However, it was most prominent in his charge to me about the value of getting a PhD, especially a PhD in African American history. If I was going to be responsible to those folks in Ferguson, and therefore my brother, I was also responsible to Vivian, and therefore the generation of freedom fighters he symbolized. And in his case, the charge was quite clear. Use my love for history to spread love, peace, justice. Love that had the ability to overcome grief. Love that had the ability to overcome difference, whether it be religious, sexual, gendered, class, regional. Love that had the ability to help my students overcome rage and pain, grief and love, justice and power, Hooks and Baker, Wright and Thompson, Murray and Parks, Vivian and King. I bring all of those to the classroom, and I give all of it to my students. And hopefully I bring it all to you today as well. So now the charge is yours. Just like today's theme, it begs the question, Are your shoulders ready?
Our last speaker is an alumni of the College of Wooster. Dr. Tamika L. Thomas Rashid is the Vice President for Student Affairs at Baldwin Wallace University. She arrived there on June 1st. Her responsibilities include the day-to-day management of 8 areas of the co-curricular experience for BW, which include student involvement, athletics, community service engagement, residence life, counseling services, health and wellness, campus recreation services, and the student union. She also serves as an officer and member of the President's Cabinet, working to support the university president and the other BW areas across the university. She serves and facilitates several university committees. Dr. Rashid has held a variety of positions in her 20-year career in the field of student affairs. Some of her areas of oversight have included Student Activities Union, Fraternity and Sorority Life, Leadership Programming, Community Service, First Year Experience, Residence Life, Multicultural Affairs, Athletics, and Student Conduct. A proud Clevelander, Dr. Rashid believes in giving back to her hometown. In addition to her professional responsibilities, Dr. Rashid is active in community and civic organizations. She serves on the Shaker Heights Library Board. She is also a member of the Cleveland NAACP, the National Council of Negro Women, NCNW, and a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Dr. Rashid received her Bachelor of Arts in a double major of History and Black Studies from the College of Wooster in 1999. She received her Master's in Higher Education Administration from The Ohio State University and her doctorate in Higher Education Administration from Ohio University. She resides in Shaker Heights, Ohio with her family. Dr. Tamika L. Thomas Rashid.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tamika Rashid. I am a proud College of Wooster alum from the class of 1999, and I am so excited and so humbled to have the opportunity to speak to you today and to deliver what I hope is an inspiring message in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King. So let's think and let's reflect together while we can over the term of, if not us, then who? When I was asked to do this, I was really excited because as a College of Wooster student, I said, this is my opportunity to share my story and hopefully inspire others. The role for leaders is one of questions, faith, and challenge. One that will be difficult, but one that is necessary in order to chart a greater future for those who follow in your footsteps. In the face of adversity, will you stand up? In the push to remain silent, will you speak? John Lewis, who inspired the great quote, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? We hear that often. He was a civil rights icon, a political leader, and a fearless advocate for opportunities and rights. He was the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from 1963 to 1966, otherwise known as SNCC. That's my Black Studies and History major coming out. And a little bit about SNCC. This was a coalition of college student leaders who were leading in the face of adversity during one of the most tumultuous times in our country. Those student leaders, primarily in the South, faced everything from physical assault to verbal assault, just to help to blaze a path for many of us, all of us. For those of you who saw Selma, you also got another glimpse of the overwhelming, remarkable leadership of Congressman Lewis. A glimpse into his exceptional leadership, his bravery, and his relentless spirit as a trailblazer. He fought relentlessly from physical assault, beatings, verbal beatings, and assault from the police, to walk in the face and to give us opportunities for voting rights. So today I ask you in his spirit, when you are challenged, will you rise to the occasion? Mr. Lewis was standing on the shoulders of others. He was one of the torchbearers that we often think about. I sit back now and I think a little bit about my dissertation topic and sorority sister, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. Dr. Bethune stood in the face of adversity, not only for her race, but her gender during a time to help to lead and to be a philanthropist, a fundraiser, and a visionary to open what is now Bethune-Cookman, but at that time was on the grounds of a junkyard in Southern Florida. When we think about other torchbearers that Mr. Lewis stood on the shoulders of, we think about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman faced, obviously, as we many know her story, and slavery, leading others who were in uncharted territories, who were fearful of what can happen, but she was fearless. Mr. Lewis, Dr. Bethune, Harriet Tubman, all have one thing in common as torchbearers. They were put in situations that we will find ourselves in time in uncharted territory, unfamiliar, as being the only one. I know many of you, if you're a student at the College of Wooster, know what that feels like. But I ask you again, as they did, will you answer a call for action? I think it's important as we talk about, will you stand up, to give you my story of how I had to stand. I was born on the east side of Cleveland. I come to you from about 10 minutes from where I grew up. I grew up in Shaker Heights, Ohio. I was born on the east side of Cleveland to parents who were from the South, Alabama and Georgia, respectively. My parents, being Southerners during that time, really helped to shape my upbringing and view of race and motivation and the cultivation of leadership. My mother was from outside of Macon, Georgia. She was born at a time in the middle of Georgia where she worked on a sharecropper's farm with her other 14 brothers and sisters at a young age picking cotton. That to her was normal. To do that at 8 years old, to go out and pick cotton in 1963, to work for others. It shaped her spirit, which ultimately shaped me. My father, he was born in Montgomery, Alabama, not too far from where Dr. Martin Luther King got his start as a pastor. He worked at gas stations as he was called colored, as he was challenged as a 10-year-old to help carry bags and do things for white people who just called him boy. As I grew up, my parents gave me these stories during a time of what they saw through their eyes as children in the civil rights movement in the middle of the South at that period. They taught me how that speaking up sometimes had consequences, and that fear for them was something they did not want for me. They saw opportunity in education. I'm a first gen and a proud first gen. My parents both respectively finishing high school only. And at that time, as a first gen, I ventured out on my own to figure out my course of leadership, which led me to the College of Wooster in the fall of 1995. When I came to Wooster weeks after the O.J. Simpson trial. It was at a time in our country, 2 years after Rodney King, but at a different space of dealing with race. A time where our voices were challenged as African-American students to say, what should we do? I was young, I was a first gen, and I was in a space that I had never been before. I surrounded myself with people who looked like me, challenged by those who did not, who often when I felt I was by myself and forced to think, what am I going to do? But here's what I learned. I learned about race. I learned about class. I grew up in Cleveland on the Southeast side where many people looked like me. But then I went to Wooster and many people didn't. I grew up in Cleveland at a space where people had the same experience as I did in a predominantly African-American high school. To come to a place like Wooster where class was defined and spaces were given there. Race and class, often in my opinion at that time, impacted your ability to lead and voice and have voice. I learned at a term about experiencing microaggressions, something that we didn't have a terminology of in that time in 1995 in the mid 90s, but I experienced it. And I continue to have an opportunity to chart my course as a leader there, to find my voice. I went on to become a resident assistant, a president of Black Women's Organization, and ultimately blazing a path and ultimately becoming a member of Delta Sigma Theta. And I say this to you in the sense that I was challenged. I was challenged academically. I'm not the best writer, but I'm a hard worker. And Wooster's independent study, IS, helped me to understand that when I had to open my eyes and push back and raise my voice in a way that sometimes I felt silence. As a history major, as a double major in history and Black studies, I felt comfortable in Black studies. I felt challenged and unheard and unseen in the history classes, as at that time as the only African-American history major. But it was there when I sat there quiet and silent, I had to remember what I thought, what my parents told me about the importance of using my voice. I was coming into my own. And there was times, and this is what I turned to you to say, you will feel lonely. I did. It will feel frustrating. I was. And it will be tiring. I was. But what Wooster taught me, and that experience sometimes of isolation and being the only, is that you have to stand in the feeling and in the face of being uncomfortable. You have to question. You have to push. You have to use the energy, spirit, and fire that sometimes being the only forces you to sit and reflect and think, what can I do? How do I develop a plan and strategy to help lead others? As I became a professional, my path there at Wooster allowed me to become what I am today. A leader in college administration. I currently serve as the Vice President for Student Affairs at Baldwin-Wallace University. I would not be here and at that university serving in this capacity as the first Vice President in the 176 years history of Baldwin-Wallace if it wasn't for my experience at the College of Wooster. There is where I learned to be uncomfortable and to be okay with maybe being the first. I didn't choose it. It chose me. And sometimes when I sit back at that table in that boardroom as the only, I remember listening and remember the readings that I had that further affirmed for me what I learned from other people, history makers like John Lewis, Mary McLeod Bethune, Harriet Tubman, that you will be placed in a space where your voice will be challenged. You will be placed in a space where you will be called to action. And you will have to answer that question of, if not you, then when, of who. So I leave you today with a checklist, a resource. Rather, if you're a faculty member, a staff, or a student, I hope you take and heed these words of advice. Things that have helped me to often when I've said, I'm tired, I'm lonely. How do I continue to call to action the things that I need to do? First, you lean, and you lean hard. If it wasn't for the supportive leadership of people like Kim Ferguson Scott, who sat in the Assistant Dean of Office of Black Studies at that Student Affairs, there at the College of Wooster, who gave me my first opportunity to not only to have a position in the Dean of Students office, but to really teach me how to listen to my voice, to come into my own and push back when I was working with her to say, what does it mean to be a leader? In the spirit and memory of Dr. Beverly Ogletree, the only African-American psychologist at that time in the mid-90s at the College of Wooster, who would sit, listen, and learn, and force me to think about what does it mean to have a voice as an African-American woman. I leaned on those two. Dr. Yvonne Williams, she's a trailblazer. And when I sat in her class for Black Studies, and she really taught me how to think about what I read, to reflect on what I heard, and what it meant for me to use my voice in the spirit of others. You have to listen. There's oftentimes when you're called to action, the first reaction is just that, to react. But what you have to do in the spirit of others, the torchbearers before us, is to listen and to make sure you understand what that call to action really is. Think about those in your path who followed. When I was there at the College of Wooster from 1995 to 1999, I often felt it was my responsibility to look back and to lift. If it wasn't for those like John Lewis and Mary McLeod Bethune and Harriet Tubman, who blazed the path for us, who thought about those who would follow them, there would be no opportunity for those of us to lead now. And finally, I say to you, think about your voice of action in making sustainable change. Here's the College administrator coming out of me to say, as Dr. Rashid, now as I'm known as, to say sustainable change is change that lasts. Sustainable change is strategic, it's thoughtful. When you are developing your plan of action, your change, make sure it's sustainable, something that will speak for you and will be there long after you. In closing, I challenge you to ask yourself, when in doubt, when you're sitting there and you're tired of being only, what would John do? What would Mary do? What would Harriet do? What have you done? What can you do to change the world is in your power by your willingness to speak up and step out. I thank you, and I hope you have the best remainder of your semester. And to my fellow alumni, thank you for making this a great opportunity and an impactful opportunity that I've had.
So we started off by introducing the American Love Project as our beginning project for the school year. And as a group, we talked about how our nation is going through a lot of different challenges, and we were trying very hard to focus on inequality and how we could correct that, how we could use our artistic voice to try to make a difference and try to make positive change. So we focused on different quotes from various people throughout history, throughout time, different genders, different nationalities, different backgrounds, and we chose to illustrate them with a variety of different artworks. So the students had a lot of personal choice in their projects. I think it's important for them to realize, even at the middle school level, that their voices need to be heard and that they are able to express themselves and make a difference through what they're making.
We always look forward to introducing Martin Luther King to the kids. Some of them know, some of them don't know. But we teach about, the kindness and how he was nonviolent in getting things to change in the world. They get that, and they know that they can make friends and they can make someone's life better. And we stress peace and equality, and they get that too.
So I work with such little kids that some of them have never even heard of Martin Luther King Day. So I start so basic by reading Happy Birthday, Martin Luther King. And it just talks about his life and his mission. The kids get fired up because they love the idea that he stood for. So it's really easy to get them to make art based on Martin Luther King Day when they hear his story. When you're teaching little kids, their world is what they know. They only know what's at home, and until they come to school, there's so much that they've never been informed about. So it's really important to just teach them everything that you can in the little time that you have. You see them 40 minutes once a week, so you just hope that something that you're saying or something that you're showing them can have an effect in their life.
My name is Karishka Sena, and I'm a junior here at the college. I'm an artistry major, and I'm on the pre-engineering track. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. As MLK Day approaches and begins, and as we get into Black History Month, one of the most important things to me about MLK Day was educating other people about what it means or what civil rights means in the American context. But even more importantly, as an international student, I started to think about what does civil rights mean in my context. I'm a Zimbabwean, and I started to think, who are the people that we call the champions of civil rights in my country? And I know these are questions that people ask across the board. So on a campus like Wooster, where we're so diverse, I really wanted us to get into sort of this idea of thinking of civil rights as a global thing and not just centralized on MLK. And I think what I wanted to do was sort of like transform this idea of civil rights in America and what they look like in other places. And I think that's really important, so as to, address the fact that one, we're a very diverse campus, but two, civil rights is still such a big issue in so many different places right now. It wasn't just the George Floyd movements here in America, or it wasn't just the NSARS movements in Nigeria. They were everywhere, and there were so many things happening. And I think it's such an important thing that on this MLK Day, we sort of start to recognize all these massive different definitions of civil rights across the world. And we've had some pretty amazing people come up with this amazing presentation. And I think one thing I really wanted to do was have people sort of think about, what does MLK Day mean to you in your context? What does civil rights mean to you where you come from? Who are your champions? Who are the people that you talk about when you talk about the liberation of your country? Or are you still in discussions about how you're going to liberate your country? And I think that's really, really important as we go into this really, really important day. So I'm really glad that this is a whole thing that's coming together, because it represents who we are as a college. And I think it can always get better going forward. So I really hope you guys enjoying this presentation. And if you ever have extensions every other MLK Day, I think this should be something that we do. Thank you.
I hope you all leave today inspired, motivated, and energized to take action. This is only the beginning. The conversations do not stop here. Following the conclusion of this ceremony, we have Justice Dialogues conducted via Zoom. The first set of Justice Dialogues start at 12:15 and conclude at 1:30. The second set of Justice Dialogues begin at 1:45 and conclude at 3 p.m. And the final group of Justice Dialogues begin at 3:15 and conclude at 4:30. Please attend the Justice Dialogue and keep the energy of the day going. Thank you for joining us today. You matter. Your legacy matters. If not you, then who?